Welcome to Philosophy15.
We're back.
No! Hey, welcome back.
Welcome back.
I'm Scott Aiken.
And I'm Robert Talese.
We're both philosophy professors at Vanderbilt University. Just a reminder for those of you new back or maybe forgot, these are 15-minute videos where we talk about philosophy for 15 minutes at a clip, unscripted, flying without a net.
It's true.
And today's an important day, Rob.
Yeah, it's John Rawls' 103rd birthday.
And so that prompted us to say, let's sit and talk about Rawls' deepest insight. Rob, what's the deepest? There are plenty of deep insights. I have a list,
yeah.
but
so here's one, right?
Okay.
You know, a lot of people read Rawls' main book, A Theory of Justice, as if it's a book about the original position and the veil of ignorance and choosing two principles to govern the basic structure of society under those very artificial conditions. And all that happens in the first 60 or so pages of the book, by the way.
Your tone of voice tells me that you don't think that
Yeah.
those are the insights. That's where I was. Okay.
Well, I mean, one wonders what happens in the rest of the book. I mean, you get the
basic setup.
You get the basic setup.
It's a good setup.
You get the spoiler alert. There are two principles. All that happens at the very beginning of the book. What happens in the rest? Well, here's the secret. You have to read the whole book to find out what the book is about. Imagine that.
I feel seen. Not in a good way.
It's like Hegel, right? You got to get to the end. You got to get to the end.
It's just about the master-slave stuff, man. Like, come on.
You got to get to the end before you can understand what's in the preface.
That's right. Okay.
Here's what that book is about, and I think that this makes the book more interesting in a way because it makes the book A Theory of Justice much more of a kind that we are familiar with in the sort of classical tradition of Western social and political philosophy. A Theory of Justice is not primarily aimed at defending the two principles and the original position and the architecture of justice as fairness. It is concerned with trying to make a case for that.
Yes.
But ultimately, the question that A Theory of Justice is trying to answer is as follows. Is there a conception of the principles to govern the basic structure of a liberal society that are such that
Got to meet certain conditions. That's
were a population of citizens understood as free and equal moral persons to live under institutions formed on the basis of those principles? Were they to live in that society, would they come to sufficiently love justice so as to uphold those institutions when it was against their interest to do so? It's fundamentally a book about the moral psychology of justice. It's trying to show that one toy conception of justice as fairness, is a plausible candidate for being a conception of justice for the basic structure of a society of free and equal moral persons, yada, yada, yada. Justice as fairness might be the kind of conception of justice that, were it instituted, people living under it would come to want to live under it. They would sufficiently develop their sense of justice.
So I got a Kantian counterpoint. Again, maybe this is a slow one across the plate. Maybe it's just a misunderstanding. But don't Kantian say, yeah, Kantian liberalism does that too. Yeah, we predict that they're going to do that. Why? Because of the fact that they got reason inside of them and they're going to come to love the fact that their reason gets to be exercised and all that jazz. That's a predictive Kantian liberal story. I can imagine a million liberals would make the same prediction.
Now,
so what's the contrast?
Good. The contrast is two. So one is that the justice as fairness, as it is presented in A Theory of Justice, is a broadly Kantian story. Rawls says, shorn of its transcendental metaphysics.
Well, that's where the Kantian presumption of, hey, they're making their prediction on the basis of that presumption.
That's exactly right.
Because you got minds,
That's
man.
exactly right. So
okay.
The idea is that we're supposed to be able to say the kind of thing that Kantians want to say, without appealing to the transcendental stuff and simply appealing to choice-worthiness under the conditions that are specified in the original position. Now, whether that's true or not is a different issue.
Yeah.
Now, but it is a critique of certain kind of, at least classical utilitarian doctrines, because it's supposed to show that straightforward utilitarianism would not be chosen in the original position. And the thought is that the key to developing a sense of justice, that is, the key to loving justice, even when it's not in your interest to do so, the key to having the right moral psychological motivations to uphold justice, even when it's not in your interest to do so, is a kind of sort of demetaphysicalized Kantian thought. The fact that you chose it, in a sense, would have chosen it under the appropriate conditions, means that you identify with it. And the argument against sort of traditional utilitarian doctrines is that they can't be presented as rational choices under the conditions established in the original position. So it's supposed to be an anti-utilitarian doctrine for that reason. And Rawls says all kinds of traditional standard things against utilitarianism. It doesn't take the distinctness of persons seriously. It doesn't really care about the distribution of utilities. It only cares about their sum. But really the argument against utilitarianism in a theory of justice is that it's insufficient to develop a robust enough conception of justice in the people who are living under the utilitarian institutions.
So maybe then a question as to whether or not this justification for liberalism, in some ways for folks who've kind of already got liberal inclinations, or maybe are already liberals, maybe a question about whether or not this, because it sounds like it's both an explanatory story and a predictive story, maybe a question as to like why folks seem to be so unhappy with liberalism now.
Well,
why are so many people who self-identify as members of this liberal society seem to be so unhappy with liberalism?
So this brings us to what I think is the second deep, and I would say the deepest insight.
Digging, okay.
And it's not anything that's contained in the first book that everybody thinks is a masterpiece, and they're right. It's the second book. The political liberalism book, I think, is the real lasting, momentous contribution from a guy who already made a momentous contribution. And the political liberalism book, I think, recognizes with a level of precision and clarity something that I think you can discern in liberal philosophy prior to 1993. But Rawls really gives you the idiom, the vocabulary to discuss it. And it's the problem that you've just pointed to. It's the problem of justifying liberalism to the people who want to be on board. A lot of people think that liberalism is about justifying liberalism to illiberal people or to people who don't care about free institutions or don't see people as free and equal moral persons. The Rawlsian insight is the insight that even if we are dealing only with a population of people who are generally on board with the liberal project, by which I mean people who are ready to see society as a fair system of cooperation among citizens understood as free and equal moral persons. Even if you get all the liberals in the room, liberal justification might still be impossible because of the irreducible fact of evaluative diversity among liberals. So the thought is that why are liberals so disenchanted with liberalism? And I think the Rawlsian insight is because liberalism needs to tell a justificatory story about itself, and that justificatory story cannot in any way diminish or cut away or marginalize any appropriately reasonable liberal evaluative perspective. And all of our stories about liberalism, except for the political liberal story, tend to be stories about the virtues of liberalism as told from the perspective of some particular evaluative liberal perspective. That's the problem.
So there's a kind of a tragic element to liberalism, because liberalism, under the conditions of liberalism, you end up with the kind of cognitive diversity that makes the justification for liberalism procedurally challenged, if not
Doomed. If not doomed. That's right.
Boom.
So,
Okay.
Again, I think that the opening paragraphs of political liberalism, which people sort of read and then gloss over pretty quickly, I think are deeply important, because the question that political liberalism, the book, tries to answer is, how is it possible for there to be a decent, well-ordered liberal society among free and equal moral persons, given that the very conditions that secure and recognize their freedom and equality generate an irreducible plurality of perspectives about what a liberal society should be. And I think that the question, how is it possible, I think Rawls is serious about that. I think Rawls is worried it's not possible. That is, Rawls, at the end of the day, it might be best to read him as motivated by a concern that the anarchist is right.
So I was going to ask another angle on this question, which is certain Republican accounts of liberalism say, yeah, half of the reason why you end up with the cognitive diversity of liberalism is because of the fact that that so many of the ways that it sells itself is in terms of some kind of, hey, these individuals, you'll be better off, or at the very least, I'm selling it to you. And liberalism has got no requirements of a kind of a social buy-in. That if we're looking for a stable state, approaching people and justifying to them as individuals and starting with individuals is always going to be doomed. So I wonder if there's there's the anarchist possibility behind there, but I wonder if another kind of external criticism is this more kind of like quasi-Republican
Traditional
conservative.
conservatism.
That's exactly it.
Right. And that is a critique. But the Rawlsian story, I think what the Rawlsian is trying to convince us of, or the later Rawlsian, the political liberal Rawlsian is trying to convince us of, is that the claim that it is possible for there to be a decent, well-ordered, stable society that is fully aware and ready to acknowledge and recognize the full evaluative diversity among reasonable positions. The fact that that's possible is the thing that's supposed to get you the buy-in.
Gotcha. You're like it's
a second order thing, right? It's like that.
Look at that. Yeah. Okay.
Look at how despite the fact that there's all of this reasonable disagreement that's in no way being hemmed in or shorn off or anything, we can still figure out a way to tell ourselves a story about the well-ordered, decent society. I think Rawls at the end of the day is not an optimist about the possibility of this. I think that he thinks that it's perhaps conceptually doomed, but I also think that he thinks that it's practically doomed. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. We've got the practical doomed. We've got a version of the conceptual doom. I wonder if someone again as an external critic would just say this is a demonstration of the fact that like you've made the conditions for political legitimacy too narrow of a window, partly because of the fact that it started from a perspective of individualism. So, like, if you start with that, you're gonna make the bullseye too hard to hit, and any disruption of the material conditions under which these folks are, or the political conditions, or familial conditions, or military conditions under which they're operating, or economic conditions, are going to make it too hard to hit. We need to find a much more stable strategy. So I wonder, like, what do you think of that kind of challenge?
Yeah, I just think that this is not giving, this kind of response doesn't give the anarchist his due. The philosophical anarchist is due.
Yeah.
I think that one of the virtues of the later Rawls is that he's really trying to take seriously the possibility that a legitimate political order, a legitimate, stable political order,
That's the part.
is impossible. And if the answer is, well, that just proves that we need to, in some way, think of citizens as something other than free and equal moral persons. We need, in some ways, to sort of shrink, constrain the sphere, the sphere of reasonable political evaluative diversity. I think Rawls is committed to saying, well, that's oppression.
You get stability,
but that's oppression, and the anarchist wins.
And the anarchist goes, "Oh,
exactly.
Told you so."
Exactly.
Philosophy 15.